Good morning, you're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani.
And me, Lou Brown, and we're here to wake you up with all of the news you need to know from around the world and across the region.
So here are your top stories. US Senate passes funding bill in bid to end the longest government shutdown.
8 people have been killed after a car exploded in Delhi on Monday evening.
And the US partially lifts Caesar Act sanctions on Syria for 180 days. First this morning, it's the longest government closure the United States has experienced, and it might soon be over. 41 days of shutdown left government services temporarily suspended and about 1.4 million federal employees on unpaid leave or working without pay.
Late Monday night, senators approved a key funding bill, paving the way for the House and President Trump to finalize the agreement. The vote follows weeks of deadlock between Republicans and Democrats, who failed to reach a deal to extend government funding beyond October the 1st, when the previous budget expired. Here's more.
The US Senate has approved the funding deal that will end the longest government shutdown in US history. The 60-40 vote passed with the support of nearly all of the chamber's Republicans and 8 Democrats late on Monday. The compromise funding package comes after the Democrats unsuccessfully sought to tie government funding to health subsidies that are due to expire at the end of the year. However, the agreement sets up a December vote on those subsidies, but it doesn't guarantee they will continue.
I just want to reiterate my gratitude for my colleagues, our staff who have worked night and day, literally, and all of those who have brought us to this point. We are going to reopen government. We're going to ensure that federal employees, whether they were furloughed or laid off or forced to work without pay, will now receive compensation that they've earned and deserve.
The deal now heads to the House of Representatives, where lawmakers are expected to vote on Wednesday. If passed, it will go to the White House for President Donald Trump's signature, marking the final step toward reopening the federal government. Despite weeks of political tension, Trump called the agreement to end the shutdown very good. He also said his administration aims to shift healthcare funding directly to citizens instead of insurance companies.
We're not going to be giving $1.5 trillion to people that came in from jails and from, the gangs and drug dealers and all of these others that they wanted to be given health care, which would have hurt our health care system. I hope that we're going to be able to have a health care where Lindsay and I were discussing it, Jim and I were discussing it, and Katie, we discussed it. We want a health care system where we pay the money to the people instead of the insurance companies. And I tell you, we're going to be working on that very hard over the next short period of time, where the people get the money. We're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars where the people get the money.
If the House approves the deal when the President signs it, the US government could be fully reopened within days.
Staying with this story, we're now going to take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe. And as you just saw in that report, it is US Senate passes bill to end government shutdown. And that's currently on our A News website at the moment. Now, it does look like it's coming to an end. It's now been passed by the Senate. It's now going to go over to the House. And then President Trump will also have to approve it as well. But it's looking likely that things will finally return back to normal and people will be able to get, federal government employees will be able to get their pay, as well as things going smoother because airports have had to close. Some airports have had to close because of a lack of staff and for safety reasons as well.
No, it's interesting. So the longest government shutdown, as you mentioned. Now the Democrats joined some Democrats joined some of the Republicans to finally get it over the line. It now goes to the House before it goes to Donald Trump to sign in. When that is, we don't know, but we know that the House has to approve it tomorrow. So today is still going to be another official government shutdown. The Senate reached that agreement on Sunday night. night after pressure to end, like I say, the longest shutdown in history. Comes less than a week after Democrats had a wave of victories across America in New Jersey, Virginia, and New York City elections. So whether this is a referendum on Trump, we don't know yet, but it's quite stark and quite promising for the Democrats, and hopefully many federal workers will go back to work, and resumption of normal flights as well as other federal funded things.
And just to quickly say, just to remind viewers at home, it's the reason for this is because the Democrats really wanted healthcare not to be changed. It meant that President Donald Trump wanted to reduce healthcare for American citizens, and it's something the Democrats did not agree to, which is why there was a deadlock for such a long time. But discussions have been had, and Republicans say that they will not sign that particular bill, and they will listen to their Democrat party officials as well. So we'll see how it goes, but that was the main cause of the deadlock. Now we'll move over to the next story that's also a headline today. And that is, so deal to end the same thing, deal to end government shutdown. So this is the Washington Post, the same thing. As you can imagine, it's a big story for the US and an even bigger one for those who've been waiting for their pay. So it's a story that we are definitely going to take notice of and see how it goes, but it's likely that it will be passed and the 41-day shutdown will come to an end.
Yes, just to add on that, some Democrats are calling those who defected to get the bill over the line like a betrayal. That's quite significant rhetoric on that, but I think many in the Democrats and across the US are just hoping to get normal working resumption. This is not going to last until for the rest of the next few years. It will only last until January, until they will have another vote on a funding bill. Donald Trump has been pointing out the Democrats as causing this issue, not himself, of course, and this is now hopefully, like we all say, get back the US working to normal conditions.
Exactly that. So moving across to the next story that's making headlines this morning, and it is on BBC. It's the India explosion. So this happened near New Delhi. Of all possibilities of what they're trying to figure out, there was an explosion that killed 8 people. Now, the police do not know what the cause is. They are investigating, but they do feel that it isn't as straightforward as it might look, and we're still getting information as the day goes on.
Yeah, it's quite interesting here. These pictures, you can see it's got a high like 8 people killed, but it's got a high level of security. Ambulances still present at the moment, and like you say, there's still an ongoing investigation into whether this could be more sinister than just an explosion accident. There were 3 people in the car at the time. They all died upon impact. That car was actually parked there a few hours before it exploded outside the Red Fort, we might add, which is quite a famous landmark in Delhi. I've been actually, so it's quite stark to see that involved, and that be the host of where this awful accident happened, if it is an accident. But we will keep you updated as the developments come in. If we can scroll down a little bit from the gallery, I just want to see the live reporting, seeing what's the latest line since we've entered the studio. Just a bit quicker. Home Minister to chair security review meeting soon. So that does suggest that this is being investigated thoroughly at this point in time.
And just also to piggyback off of that, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has expressed his condolences to the victims' families and said he is also reviewing the situation. So it is quite a shock for those, as this happened in the evening of yesterday evening, around 10 to 7 local time, as you mentioned, Lou, about the car, and it unfortunately the explosion that happened, killing 8 people.
Yeah, let's have a look at what we've got on our next headline. France 24, France's ex-president Nicolas Sarkozy granted conditional release after 20 days in jail. Now, quite significant, this ties in actually, he was accused and found guilty of taking money from Gaddafi during the elections in France. Gaddafi, the Libyan leader, and I'll just add on that, and today's is another significant development. His youngest son was released from prison in Lebanon after 10 years on a 900 grand bail. But we'll stay focusing on Sarkozy. At the moment, he describes his conditions in the French prison as grueling, being locked away. He had, obviously because of his high-profile nature, being an ex-leader of France, that he had 2 guards securing him, but he was in confinement to a very large extent.
Yes, because obviously for his safety and because he is very well known. Also, just to add to that, he is appealing this particular conviction because he feels that it is based on revenge and hatred from those of his enemies. So it's interesting. He has now been released after staying 3 weeks in jail, in prison, and now is released and is awaiting to go forward for his appeal. And as you mentioned, his son has also been released. So it's a double unite for them.
Not his son, Gaddafi's son.
No, not Sarkozy's.
Oh, no, Gaddafi's son.
Gaddafi's son. I'm getting confused.
Well,
yes.
yeah, no, we have lots of headlines and that will come on a little bit later. All right, let's have a look, if we have a little bit more time, at the next story. And there we are. Would you want to keep this one?
Yes, Syria's jihadist turned president caps extraordinary transformation with the White House visit. So he visited yesterday. He was there. It was the first time that a Syrian president has actually been invited and visited the White House. And in that, sanctions have been lifted and a number of discussions were had. But Trump acknowledged the rough past they've had and said that it actually shaped him as a leader and gave him quite a bit of kudos in relation to what he is now going to be doing in Syria. And you can just tell that Trump actually wants to create more of a relationship with the Syrian leader al-Shara and praised him as a strong leader as well to make Syria more successful.
Yes, al-Shara has made 20 foreign trips since declaring himself president in January. The visit symbolised Syria's push for more diplomatic reinvention under his premiership. We also know that he signed a deal with Donald Trump to champion becoming the 90th state, Syria becoming the 90th state to combat Islamic State. It's quite significant considering al-Shara was a former head of HTS, a declared terrorist organisation. So we are seeing vast differences in the leadership and Syria's future, and as well a news website covering that. Syria's al-Shara and Trump discussed strengthening ties. We know they are quite fond diplomatically of building greater relations between each other. Especially within that particular region, as we've seen that Trump's also spoken to Central Asian leaders, as well as what's happening across the South Caucasus as well. Well, that's the press roundup for today. We're going to take a very short break, but when we return, we'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Stay with us.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Welcome back to Daybreak. Now let's take a look at the global stories. Ukraine's Anti-Corruption Bureau has opened a sweeping investigation into alleged kickbacks in the country's energy sector, implicating senior officials at the state nuclear power company Energoatom. President Zelensky said his energy minister says transparency and accountability are vital as a scandal unfolds. Here's more.
Ukraine's Anti-Corruption Bureau says it has uncovered what it calls a high-level criminal organisation operating inside the country's energy and defence sectors. Senior Detective Oleksandr Abakumov said investigators had gathered substantial evidence.
As a result of the work carried out, thousands of hours of audio recordings were obtained, which are evidence of the activities of a high-level criminal organisation operating in the energy and defence sectors. Among the currently identified members of the criminal organisation are a former advisor to the Minister of Energy, the Executive Director for Physical Protection and Security of the joint stock company Energoatom, a well-known businessman, and 4 individuals working in back offices.
He said the group's main goal was to profit illegally from contracts with Ukraine's state-run nuclear operator.
The main task of the criminal organisation was to obtain illegal benefits from contractors of Energoatom.
Construction continues at the Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant, one of several facilities managed by Energoatom, which supplies most of Ukraine's electricity. In Kyiv, Energy Minister Svitlana Hrinchuk said the investigation must be conducted openly and fairly.
I hope that the objectivity and openness of the investigation will not affect, but will only reassure our international partners that we are open to any actions that are taking place.
President Volodymyr Zelensky also addressed the issue, calling the case a crucial test of Ukraine's fight against corruption during wartime.
Any effective action against corruption is very necessary. The inevitability of punishment is necessary. Energoatom provides Ukraine with the largest share of energy generation now. Cleanliness in the company is a priority. In energy, in every industry, everyone who built the schemes must receive a clear procedural answer. There must be sentences.
Zelensky urged government officials and law enforcement agencies to work closely with anti-corruption investigators to ensure accountability. The $100 million scandal has increased pressure on Kyiv to show progress in tackling corruption, a key condition for joining the European Union and securing ongoing international support.
Now, US President Donald Trump is threatening to sue the BBC over what he calls a false portrayal of a speech he gave on the 6th of January in 2021. Trump's lawyers demanded that the British broadcaster withdraw its Panorama documentary and apologise. They're warning legal action worth at least $1 billion if it fails to do so by Friday. The broadcasting company admitted what it described as an error of judgment in editing parts of the speech and says it'll review the president's complaint and respond in due course. The controversy has led to resignations of Director General Tim Davie and News Chief Executive Deborah Turness.
In France, former French President Nicolas Sarkozy says the truth will prevail after winning the right to remain free while appealing his conviction for criminal conspiracy. On Monday, a Paris court ruled that the former president doesn't pose a flight risk, allowing his release as the appeal process continues. In a post on X, Sarkozy thanked supporters and said he will now focus on proving his innocence, maintaining that he is the victim of what he called revenge and hatred. Sarkozy was sentenced to prison last month for allegedly seeking campaign funds from the late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi during his 2007 election bid.
You know, an interesting case, Nicolas Sarkozy, because this is not the first time that he's been accused of illegal malpractice as well. We know during his stint in 2007 to 2012, he's had a lot of controversy around his life, and this. Do you really believe that he was released from prison for the reasons he says, or do you think it's because of his safety?
I think it is. I think there's a mixture, but I definitely do think it's because of his safety, which is why they've had to have 2 guards, which is it costs obviously, I'm sure, the government extra money to make sure that he has his safety all intact and that he has to be in isolation, which he said he doesn't like, but that is prison. When I heard that, I was like, well, really and truly. And he has got a conviction, which he is obviously appealing. He says it's wrong, but yeah. I don't want to.
He has strong family support, though.
He does.
His son and his sons and his wife were both there, providing support as well. We know that no one's left him, like in his family, for that trial in particular. He has, like you say, this connected to Gaddafi, the former Libyan leader, which is quite surprising, really, taking funds from Gaddafi. We know Gaddafi caused a lot of controversy during
his time.
So whether that actually had some material impact and whether they can trace that, that's quite hard.
Well, this is the other thing. Obviously, he is appealing it, so it is quite interesting to find out what evidence he will show that is going to be different from what the prosecutors would have used in order to put him, obviously, to convict him of those particular crimes. So it's just one of those things. You never know until all the information is out there. So we'll see. But I think for him, it's good news that he is home. And I don't know whether or not for others, whether or not the justice system has worked for them in their favour.
A very divisive figure in France, indeed. But now at least 8 people have been killed and around 20 others injured after a car exploded in New Delhi on Monday night. It happened near the Indian capital's historic Red Fort, a 17th century Mughal era landmark that draws thousands of visitors every day.
Families of victims are mourning the loss of loved ones after a car explosion killed at least 8 people in India on Monday evening. Around 20 others were injured when the blast happened near New Delhi's historic Red Fort, which is visited by tourists throughout the year. It happened at just before 7 o'clock local time when a slow-moving vehicle stopped at a red light outside one of the country's busiest tourist areas. Within seconds, the car burst into flames, sending thick smoke and debris into the air, according to reports. Emergency crews and firefighters battled flames that spread to several nearby vehicles and 3 auto rickshaws. Officials say the fire was brought under control within the hour, but charred cars and mangled wreckage lined the street as crowds gathered in shock. Indian police say they're investigating under a stringent law used to fight terrorism. However, the cause of the blast hasn't been identified. A senior security meeting is expected to take place on Tuesday morning to assess the investigation's progress. The area remains sealed off as forensic teams continue to examine what caused the deadly explosion in one of Delhi's busiest quarters.
Israel has returned the remains of 15 Palestinians to Gaza on Monday under the current ceasefire deal. The move comes as a day after Hamas released the body of an Israeli hostage. The transfer, mediated by the Red Cross, raises the total number of Palestinian bodies returned since October to 315, according to the Gaza's health ministry. The exchange comes as a senior US envoy, Jared Kushner, met Israeli leaders to discuss the next phase of the ceasefire agreement.
Well, just on that, we're talking about the ceasefire agreement.
Yes.
We haven't even had an inkling of what's going to happen next.
We haven't, and I think we're happy. I think most people around the globe are happy that a ceasefire is currently in place so that people's lives can return back to somewhat normality. But at the same time, we know it's a 20-point plan. I think we're only on the first point.
That's not even been completed.
And that hasn't been fully completed, as you just mentioned. And there are a number of other steps. We know that there is a Gaza stability process team coming together as well to make sure that peace is implemented in that region. But it seems quite slow. Yes, there's no transitional government. We've heard rumours of former Prime Minister Tony Blair of the UK being involved. That's been relatively quiet. A lot of the international community the media isn't focusing as heavily anymore. It's almost like, well, we've done the first step, and domestically in Israel that very much felt like the most important step for them and for the families. But following that, what comes next is going to be a longer process than many would have thought. Yes, definitely. So obviously we're covering the story. We'll make sure that we are on top of it. But yeah, so far it's been very slow. Well, staying on this topic, however, life in Gaza remains quite difficult for many residents. A month after the ceasefire kicked in, families are struggling to rebuild amid shortages of food, medicine and clean water. Prices for basic goods have soared, driven by limited supply and damaged infrastructure. While some markets have reopened and aid is trickling in, many Gazans say recovery feels distant, with daily life still marked by uncertainty and hardship.
Palestinians in southern Gaza are struggling to cope with soaring prices and an uncertain future, despite a month-long ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. In the streets of Khan Yunis, vendors continue their daily routines, preparing falafel, selling vegetables and baking bread. But many say survival is harder than ever.
The future is bleak and uncertain. Given our current situation, things remain as they are. Truce. No truce. We do not see a truce. The war is ongoing, and the horizon is dark. We see the country's situation as very difficult.
Financial strain continues to rise as food becomes increasingly unaffordable.
Everything is expensive. Nothing has gotten cheaper. But on the contrary, some things have become even more expensive than before. Regarding meat, meat is scarce here and extremely expensive. As for vegetables, naturally, vegetables and fruits, avocados and everything else are all expensive, and people can't afford these goods because there is no cash and there is no money.
The ceasefire, part of a US-backed peace plan, was meant to pause 2 years of conflict and ease Gaza's humanitarian crisis. But despite pledges to scale up aid, deliveries remain far below what is needed for the territory's 2.3 million residents. Israel says it is meeting the required flow of 600 aid trucks a day and accuses Hamas of intercepting supplies, a claim Hamas denies. For families in Khan Yunis, survival remains the priority as inflation, displacement and hardship overshadow hopes of recovery.
Over to the United States, and Washington has partially lifted what's called the Caesar Act sanctions on Syria for 180 days, a big step in warming ties between Washington and Damascus. The move comes after Syrian President Ahmad al-Shara made a historic visit to Washington on Monday, the first by a Syrian leader since 1946. The Caesar Act was introduced in 2019 and aimed at punishing Syria's former Bashar al-Assad regime and blocking foreign investment linked to the government. Under the new arrangement, most sanctions are on hold except for deals involving Russia or Iran, while restrictions on Assad and his close allies remain.
Foreign ministers from the G7 and several partner countries have gathered in Niagara, Canada for a 2-day meeting. Attendees include ministers from Australia, India and Ukraine. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio will discuss global security, critical minerals, maritime security and President Donald Trump's efforts to bring peace to Ukraine and Gaza. The meeting will focus on economic resilience, energy security and strengthening international cooperation.
Now, Lahore is once again choking under toxic smog, with air quality hitting hazardous levels and outdoor workers among the worst affected. As the haze thickens, many say their health and livelihoods are both under threat.
Toxic smog has once again blanketed Lahore, turning Pakistan's cultural capital into one of the most polluted cities in the world. Data from Global Monitor IQ Air showed the city's air quality index reached 324 on Monday, a level considered hazardous for human health. For most residents, it means staying indoors. But for daily wage laborers, that's not an option. Many continue to work outdoors, surrounded by dust and fumes.
Our health is greatly affected because the dust is always flying around. Our throat gets sore, eyes get irritated, and it takes a toll on our health because it's hard work. That's why we also get injuries frequently.
Black smoke rises from heavy machinery as construction workers push through long shifts without proper safety gear. Others wait by the roadside, hoping for a day's work, despite worsening air and falling temperatures.
We're struggling to make ends meet. The smog and weather are making us sick, and our earnings are going towards treatment. We don't have any protective masks or gloves. On top of that, it's getting cold, and we're suffering huge losses. We request the government to please consider our situation.
With little protection, some workers rely on cheap eyewear and makeshift measures to cope.
The basic point is this. Look, we've put on these glasses that cost 100 rupees. We can't afford good quality glasses. If something goes wrong, if we get sick, who will we tell? Will anyone give us medicine? No one will give it to us.
As the haze deepens, Lahore's skyline fades behind a curtain of smoke and dust, a familiar winter scene in Punjab province, where vehicle emissions, crop burning, and construction dust trap millions in a cycle of polluted air and poor health.
Well, we're just going to take a quick break. When we get back, we will be having an in-studio guest to discuss the regional headlines. Stay with us.
What is power? Has leadership truly evolved, or are the old rules of geopolitics still pulling the strings behind the scenes? Who is really powerful? And what makes people feel powerless? new series explores the secrets, strategies, and consequences of power.
Welcome back. Now let's take you through the news of what is happening across the region. First, as Azerbaijan deepens its role in Euro-Asian transport routes, attention is shifting to the North-South Transport Corridor, a project connecting Russia, Iran and the Caspian region. Recent talks in Baku marked a step forward, but analysts say the project is also reshaping regional alliances and testing political trust, particularly with India.
As operational steps continue along the East-West Transport Corridor and the Zangezur Corridor, practical work is also underway to develop the North-South Transport Corridor and modernize its infrastructure. In October, Deputy Prime Ministers of Azerbaijan and Russia, along with Iran's Transport Minister, met in Baku, marking a key step forward. The parties agreed to deepen customs, border and logistics cooperation, establish a new working group, and target an annual freight volume of 15 million tons. Among interested stakeholders, India has shown particular interest. The corridor offers New Delhi direct access to Russian and European markets, presenting significant trade opportunities. Yet for Azerbaijan, the issue is not only logistical, it is also a matter of trust and political alignment. Analysts emphasize that Baku probably has not forgotten India's hostile policy towards Azerbaijan, including arming Armenia and the Islamophobic approach of the Modi government. These factors make Azerbaijan cautious in its partnership decisions along the North-South Transport Corridor. This gives Azerbaijan real options to exclude India from the corridor, asserting control over a strategic trade route. India's stance has effectively isolated it from the Caspian region and the South Caucasus, reducing its prospects for cooperation with the regional countries. Meanwhile, relations with Pakistan are at their highest level in history. The Azerbaijan-Turkey-Pakistan trilateral format already plays a key role in regional politics, influencing not only defense but also logistics, energy and communications networks. Analysts also note that as Pakistan expands its regional engagements, including limited outreach to Armenia, and India remains absent from the North-South Transport Corridor, the geopolitical balance tilts in favor of Baku. This dynamic, they say, gives Azerbaijan greater diplomatic flexibility and bargaining power both regionally and globally. In this context, the North-South Transport Corridor is not just a transport route, it is a reflection of Azerbaijan's multi-vector policy, diplomatic agility and economic independence.
And with all that in mind, we're joined live in studio by Shabnam Safarova, Chair of the Public Union for Progress of Karabakh, to discuss how Azerbaijan's growing role in Eurasian transport routes is shaping regional alliances. Shabnam, thank you very much for coming in this morning. I just want to start. In the South Caucasus, are the East-West and North-South corridors competing for influence, or do they complement each other?
I think it is complementary rather than competing, because yes, they can compete in, for example, attraction of investment or because of time, but at the end of the day, they are complementing each other, and these routes are making Azerbaijan as a hub of transportation linkages.
That's great, but at the recent meeting between Azerbaijan, Russia and Iran, was there any real progress made on the North-South corridor, especially the unfinished Rash-Arat railway, Astara railway?
I think they are trying to do it just step by step. It is for sure, it is not impossible. So it is impossible to make to eliminate all bottlenecks at the same time. But the key point here is there is, yes, some progress. So they are not staying at its place, but they are trying to move step by step.
And with the step-by-step process, would you say what are the main challenges in that? Do you think progress is slow, or is it just continuing?
I think progress is continuing. it is a key point. But let's say the speed of progress, it depends for sure from the approach of countries. And in that case, we see that political interests are over than economic interests. But Azerbaijan's main approach is by economic interests. And I think in that case, the rational approach is very important. I mean, cost-benefit analysis and for the benefit for future interests of regional countries, etc.
Well, we talk about international politics as well here. How serious are the tensions between Azerbaijan and India at the moment? And should Baku use its leverage to limit India's role in the north-south route?
I don't think Azerbaijan is trying to limit it because, the experience shows that Azerbaijan always is trying to make balanced policy. And it welcomes the participation, the involvement of partners of other countries to the process, but not bypassing the main role of Azerbaijan in this region, because it is historical role and it is geographical role and geopolitical role, and the countries cannot be a partner in these projects by bypassing Azerbaijan's significant role.
And what's the latest, can you tell us, on the Zangezur or the TRIPP, so the Trump Prosperity Corridor, and how crucial is that to Azerbaijan's wider plans?
First of all, I think it depends. In this period, it depends on Armenia's approach, because Azerbaijan's conditions are straightforward. That it is respect to sovereignty of Azerbaijan, recognize territorial integrity, and it means Armenia has to make some changes in its constitution, etc., which is very logical in that case. Not only logical, but politically ethical, I can say. But it seems the Armenian government is facing some troubles internally for eliminating these bottlenecks, which can speed up the process, the progress process in Zangezur corridor. And I think Azerbaijan's view in that point is not territorial, it is strategic. It is beyond linking mainland Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan. It is about the Central Asia, China, and let's say European countries. It is about decreasing logistics costs. It is about enhancing economy after, let's say, pandemic. And that's why if we can eliminate the bottlenecks which I mentioned, so we can make some progress, I believe.
Well, you just took the next question out my mouth regarding Armenia. We know Azerbaijan's lifted the embargo on cargo to Armenia. How significant is that move? And I just want to focus as well on international actors. What countries are the most important for Azerbaijan to work with now?
I think it is more than maybe even 30 years Azerbaijan has not changed its opinion. First of all, yes, Azerbaijan always is interested in balanced policy. So always is good in relations with external partners. But for sure, Azerbaijan has its main partners like Turkey, let's say Pakistan. We have the countries which we have economic interests, political interests, etc. But there are some countries where, that our, let's say, relations are beyond politics, are beyond economy, and etc. And I think in this period it is not only in this period, but historically it's Turkey and Pakistan.
Well, thank you very much, Shabnam, for coming in today and your insights. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to Iraq now, and Iraqis began casting ballots on Tuesday in parliamentary elections to choose a new 329-member legislature. More than 7,700 candidates are competing in the election, which will decide whether Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani secures a second term. This marks Iraq's sixth parliamentary vote since 2003, while the US-led invasion. Those were your regional stories for the day. We'll be back after the short break, where I'll be joined by an international and independent Chinese strategist, Andrew Leung, on Japan and China's recent spat. Welcome back. You're watching A New Daybreak on A News with me, Nadia Jani, and Lou Brown. Here are today's top stories. US Senate passes funding bill in bid to end the longest government shutdown.
8 people have been killed after a car exploded in Delhi on Monday evening.
And the US partially lifts Caesar Act sanctions on Syria for 180 days. Ukraine's Anti-Corruption Bureau has opened a sweeping investigation into alleged kickbacks in the country's energy sector, implicating senior officials at the state nuclear power company. President Zelensky said, and his energy minister say, transparency and accountability are vital as the scandal unfolds.
Ukraine's Anti-Corruption Bureau says it has uncovered what it calls a high-level criminal organization operating inside the country's energy and defense sectors. Senior Detective Alexander Abakumov said investigators had gathered substantial evidence.
As a result of the work carried out, thousands of hours of audio recordings were obtained, which are evidence of the activities of a high-level criminal organization operating in the energy and defense sectors. Among the currently identified members of the criminal organization are a former advisor to the Minister of Energy, the Executive Director for Physical Protection and Security of the joint stock company Energoatom, a well-known businessman, and 4 individuals working in back offices.
He said the group's main goal was to profit illegally from contracts with Ukraine's state-run nuclear operator.
The main task of the criminal organization was to obtain illegal benefits from contractors of Energoatom.
Construction continues at the Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant, one of several facilities managed by Energoatom, which supplies most of Ukraine's electricity. In Kyiv, Energy Minister Svitlana Hrinchuk said the investigation must be conducted openly and fairly.
I hope that the objectivity and openness of the investigation will not affect, but will only reassure our international partners that we are open to any actions that are taking place.
President Volodymyr Zelensky also addressed the issue, calling the case a crucial test of Ukraine's fight against corruption during wartime.
Any effective action against corruption is very necessary. The inevitability of punishment is necessary. Energoatom provides Ukraine with the largest share of energy generation now. Cleanliness in the company is a priority. In energy, in every industry, everyone who built the schemes must receive a clear procedural answer. There must be sentences.
Zelensky urged government officials and law enforcement agencies to work closely with anti-corruption investigators to ensure accountability. The $100 million scandal has increased pressure on Kyiv to show progress in tackling corruption, a key condition for joining the European Union and securing ongoing international support.
Now, apologies if you've heard this before, but in our last bulletin we did have technical difficulties with our guest. But Japan was involved in a war of words with China on Monday after Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi said a Chinese attack on Taiwan could constitute a survival-threatening situation for Japan, requiring the use of force. Her comment sparked criticism from Beijing, who then posted a strong statement on X and later deleted it. Japan's new leader has committed to beefing up the military and met Taiwan's representative to the summit the day after her meeting with Xi, angering China. Now I hand over to you, Nadia, who's joined in studio live.
I am joined live by Andrew Leong, who is the International Independent China Strategist. Hello and welcome to the programme. My first question is, okay, so these two countries, we know that they're not seeing eye to eye. Do you think that China overreacted to Japan's Prime Minister's stance in his personal post about the leader? Some say that this wasn't very diplomatic.
Well, I think that Japan is now hyping the Taiwan issue because the peaceful unification remains Beijing's top priority for the unification, which of course Beijing has set a deadline of 2049, which is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. But then from now until 2049, there is sufficient time for the Taiwan authorities to come to the negotiation table. And Beijing wants to create the momentum towards that end through peaceful means, because the Taiwan Straits is a very treacherous body of waters. And Beijing is seeing this rhetoric about an early invasion as a deliberate trap to drag down the Beijing government. But then, on the other hand, Beijing wants to create the momentum towards negotiation on peaceful terms for the eventual unification, because the two peoples belong to the one same civilization, same culture, same language, and then they are increasingly interacting with one another through visits, tourism, and people-to-people exchanges, and businesses. As many as over 300,000 Taiwanese, together with members of the family, have been living and working on the mainland on their businesses. And then a lot of Taiwanese individuals have found business openings in, for example, in making films, and you can see the films coming out of mainland China, touting Taiwanese directors. Taiwan, China, Taiwanese director, Mr. So-and-so, or Miss So-and-so, and also a lot of the Taiwanese young people are finding business opportunities, for example, opening up top-class restaurants.
But Mr. Leong, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. Yes, no, definitely. But Taiwan also sees Japan as a close ally. And obviously Japan says that if anything was to happen, they will step in. And now it's something that Ms. Takahashi, she said that, you know, we want to boost our military capabilities. Do you think that was a right move for her to say? Because obviously it did spark some outrage from China.
I think Beijing has made it quite clear, not only diplomatically, but also through the enactment of the Anti-Taiwan Secession Act decades ago, mandating the Beijing government to act militarily to prevent any open declaration of independence. And of course, Taiwan has never been recognized as a country, and Taiwan was invaded during the Second World War by Japan. And Taiwan had always been part of China, dating back to the Ming Dynasty, the 1300s, or even earlier, when the Ming Dynasty, of course, had a general stationed in Taiwan. And then, of course, after the rapprochement between President Nixon and Chairman Mao, Taiwan was de-recognized as a country, and the United Nations also de-recognized Taiwan as a country, recognizing instead the authorities in Beijing as representing the whole of China. And the United States keeps on adhering to this policy. But on the other hand, there is a Taiwan Relations Act in the United States empowering the United States to supply arms to Taiwan.
Well,
now,
exactly on
dimension.
that. Yeah, and exactly on what you just mentioned there. Obviously, they've had relations between the US, but US President Donald Trump has said and spoken to Xi Jinping about, China not invading Taiwan. And Xi actually said to Donald Trump that he wouldn't do it during his administration, saying that they promised that they would hold off. Do you think he will stick to that promise? And is a future invasion inevitable for China?
Well, I mean, I mentioned the ultimate aim is 2049. I think President Xi is unlikely to last that long, and therefore it is correct. And also because, as I said, Beijing's emphasis is always on peaceful unification. So resort to military means can only be triggered by unilateral declaration of independence. So provided that doesn't happen, Beijing would not take military action, obviously. But of course, keep on creating the momentum towards moving Taiwan to the negotiation table through military deterrence, for example, with air and also naval forces patrolling the Taiwan Strait, but also creating more opportunities for the Taiwan people to interact with people on the mainland. And of course, Washington doesn't want a war over Taiwan, because Taiwan is thousands of miles away from American homeland. And of course, China is now developing the world's largest navy by numbers, and there's now modern hypersonic weapons, and also the so-called A2AD. A2 means 2A, means anti-access area denial. That means that they can, Beijing can use hypersonic missiles, high-precision aircraft killer missiles to deter the approach of aircraft carrier groups in the Taiwan Straits. So I think the American military knows this, and America does want a war over Taiwan. But on the other hand, Japan is now being used as a useful ploy to provoke Beijing as a counterpart of the anti-China policy.
Yes.
And now this new Japanese administration under Takaichi has long been known as an anti-China hawk. And so these are the dynamics involved at the moment.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for your insight and for joining us this morning on the programme. Thank you, Mr. Leung.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, a deal aimed at ending the US government shutdown has passed the Senate, paving the way for the record-breaking 41-day deadlock to be broken. Late Monday night, senators approved a key funding bill. This will now move over to the House and President Trump to finalise the agreement.
The US Senate has approved the funding deal that will end the longest government shutdown in US history. The 60-40 vote passed with the support of nearly all of the chamber's Republicans and 8 Democrats late on Monday. The compromise funding package comes after the Democrats unsuccessfully sought to tie government funding to health subsidies that are due to expire at the end of the year. However, the agreement sets up a December vote on those subsidies, but it doesn't guarantee they will continue.
I just want to reiterate my gratitude for my colleagues, our staff who have worked night and day, literally, and all of those who have brought us to this point. We are going to reopen government. We're going to ensure that federal employees, whether they were furloughed or laid off or forced to work without pay, will now receive compensation that they've earned and deserve.
The deal now heads to the House of Representatives, where lawmakers are expected to vote on Wednesday. If passed, it will go to the White House for President Donald Trump's signature, marking the final step toward reopening the federal government. Despite weeks of political tension, Trump called the agreement to end the shutdown very good. He also said his administration aims to shift healthcare funding directly to citizens instead of insurance companies.
We're not going to be giving $1.5 trillion to people that came in from jails and from, the gangs and drug dealers and all of these others that they wanted to be given health care, which would have hurt our health care system. I hope that we're going to be able to have a health care where Lindsay and I were discussing it, Jim and I were discussing it, and Katie, we discussed it. We want a health care system where we pay the money to the people instead of the insurance companies. And I tell you, we're going to be working on that very hard over the next short period of time, where the people get the money. We're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars where the people get the money.
If the House approves the deal when the president signs it, the US government could be fully reopened within days.
Oil prices are climbing as optimism grows that the US government shutdown may soon end, easing concerns about lower fuel demand. The potential deal to reopen federal agencies could revive travel and energy use during the winter season.
Oil prices moved higher on Monday, driven by hopes that the US government shutdown could soon be resolved. Brent crude rose above $64 per barrel, while US WTI oil surpassed $60, reflecting renewed confidence in demand. The potential reopening comes after 40 days of federal closures that disrupted air travel and sparked worries about falling fuel demand. President Donald Trump said negotiations are very close to a deal, with Congress aiming to fund the government through January. An end to the shutdown could boost air travel over the winter holidays, supporting oil demand. However, price gains are still tempered by concerns over excess global supply. OPEC and its allies recently paused production after a partial increase, signaling that they remain cautious about oversupply. Investors are also keeping a close eye on upcoming monthly reports from OPEC and the International Energy Agency, which are expected to provide further insight into global oil demand and production trends.
Staying with the US, and Washington has partially lifted what's called the Caesar Act sanctions on Syria for 180 days. A big step in warming ties between Washington and Damascus. The move comes after Syrian President Ahmad al-Shara made a historic visit to Washington on Monday, the first by a Syrian leader since 1946. The Caesar Act was introduced in 2019 and aimed at punishing Syria's former Bashar al-Assad regime and blocking foreign investment linked to the government. Under the new arrangement, most sanctions are on hold, except for deals involving Russia or Iran, while restrictions on Assad and his close allies remain.
President Trump has threatened to sue the BBC for $1 billion over a documentary that his lawyer claimed included malicious, disparaging edits to a speech Mr. Trump delivered in 2021. In a letter, Trump's lawyers demanded a full retraction of the documentary, an apology, and what his lawyers said would be payments that appropriately compensate President Trump for the harm caused. And if these demands were not met by Friday this week, a lawsuit will be filed against the broadcasting company.
I think right here we're going to...
Now, the first day of COP30 in Belém, Brazil, has concluded. Delegates from over 190 countries opened the summit with calls for urgent climate action.
Delegates from more than 190 countries gathered on Monday for the opening of COP30 in Belém, Brazil, aiming to push forward climate action and reverse the course of global warming, a decade after the Paris Agreement. Azerbaijan officially handed over the COP chairmanship to Brazil. Speaking at the ceremony, COP29, Chair Mukhtar Babayev urged countries to honor past commitments while formally passing leadership to Brazil, and COP30 President André Correa do Lago. He highlighted Azerbaijan's role in advancing global climate goals and reminded delegates of last year's historic Baku finance goal, stressing that the world now needs concrete action, not just debate.
Science is our compass.
COP30 President André Correa do Lago formally opened the summit, describing it as a COP of implementation. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva echoed the call for urgent action.
It's time to inflict another defeat on the deniers. Without the Paris Agreement, the world would be doomed to catastrophic warming of almost 5 degrees by the end of the century. We are moving in the right direction, but at the wrong speed.
He urged nations to invest in climate solutions rather than war. UN Climate Change Executive Secretary Simon Steele further emphasized the scale of the challenge. He noted that current climate pledges could reduce global emissions by 12% by 2035.
But friends, let me be clear. In this arena of COP30, your job here is not to fight one another. Your job here is to fight this climate crisis together. Paris is working to deliver real progress. Let's not forget that.
Still also confirmed that U.S. contributions to the UN's climate budget for the coming fiscal year were covered by philanthropic donations after the United States skipped the summit entirely. Empty U.S. seats were a visible reminder of its absence. Germany also took the floor, defending its climate finance contributions. State Secretary Jochen Flassbart highlighted Germany's support for the Tropical Forest Forever facility.
Germany has been instrumental throughout the last 1.5 years. We contributed financially to the preparation of this COP with regard to the TFFF, and the German Chancellor announced that Germany is in support of the TFFF and will contribute substantially also finance-wise.
The voices of the private sector and indigenous communities were also heard. Over the course of the first week, negotiators are expected to outline priorities, explore one another's positions, and announce action plans and financing pledges. The Amazon city of Belém will host discussions on climate finance, adaptation, and mitigation, with the summit unfolding against the backdrop of global conflicts and the absence of the United States, a key historical emitter.
Staying on COP30, Orkan Amashov, who is currently in Belém, has more from the venue on what's going on.
The COP30 has officially kicked off today in Belém, Brazil. Naturally, today's key focus is going to be on the agenda. It's absolutely vital that by the end of the day one, parties are able to come to a certain form of consensus regarding the key priorities forming the very essence of that agenda. It hasn't happened yet, but there's no guarantee it will happen today. There are certain examples in the history of conference of the parties that agenda was adopted actually on day 2. Today we heard from COP29 President Mukhtar Babayev, who delivered his remarks, particularly focusing on the necessity of establishing and actually appreciating this continuum between different COPs.
Without Baku finance goal, without finance, nothing to do, because all the plans, all these investment or subsidies to the vulnerable countries, it depends to the financial decisions made in Baku. That's why today so important to start to implement the process, start to implement the contributions. That's why we today represent the document, invoice for the donors to perform their pledge, their obligations for adaptation funds, so for other funds related to the vulnerable countries, to the developing world.
Naturally, COP29 in Baku built upon UAE consensus, and it is widely expected, and it goes without saying, that COP30 in Brazil is going to build upon the achievements attained in Baku. So it's going to be a very long day here. And earlier I actually spoke to the governor of the state of Pará of Brazil, Mr. Helbert Balhunha, and asked about the key sensibilities and actually the particular focus of this very COP. Let's have a listen to what he said.
I think this opportunity is a highlight opportunity to put Amazon rainforest in the central agenda in COP30. We need urgent actions to engage the leaders to most fund and ask the climate events sometimes. So I believe in COP30 we deliver more results, more ambitions, and policies to create the balance they reduce the deforestation, the love of the development, the sustainable development, and the environmental agendas.
But the reality is that each COP has got its own peculiar, specific characteristics. In Baku, the key focus was finance. NCQG, that fundamental decision about climate finance, was the key element of that very COP. But that COP was incredibly successful. On day one, back in 2024, there was on day one and day two, there was a consensus on the loss and damage fund. There was also an agreement on Article 6.2 and 6.4. There was a particular particular interest ascribed to the needs of indigenous people in different parts of the world, and also, of course, small island developing countries. During this COP, bearing in mind the locality, bearing in mind that we are actually in Brazil, the biodiversity, the plight of the people living in the Amazon basin are going to be discussed and carefully deliberated upon. Well, it's going to be a long day, as I said earlier. That's all for now. Orkun Amashov, A News.
Now, Lahore is once again choking under toxic smog, with air quality hitting hazardous levels and outdoor workers among the worst affected. As the haze thickens, many say their health and livelihoods are both under threat.
Toxic smog has once again blanketed Lahore, turning Pakistan's cultural capital into one of the most polluted cities in the world. Data from global monitor IQ Air showed the city's air quality index reached 324 on Monday, a level considered hazardous for human health. For most residents, it means staying indoors, but for daily wage laborers, that's not an option. Many continue to work outdoors, surrounded by dust and fumes.
Our health is greatly affected because the dust is always flying around. Our throat gets sore, eyes get irritated, and it takes a toll on our health because it's hard work. That's why we also get injuries frequently.
Black smoke rises from heavy machinery as construction workers push through long shifts without proper safety gear. Others wait by the roadside, hoping for a day's work, despite worsening air and falling temperatures.
We're struggling to make ends meet. The smog and weather are making us sick, and our earnings are going towards treatment. We don't have any protective masks or gloves. On top of that, it's getting cold, and we're suffering huge losses. We request the government to please consider our situation.
With little protection, some workers rely on cheap eyewear and makeshift measures to cope.
The basic point is this. Look, we've put on these glasses that cost 100 rupees. We can't afford good quality glasses. If something goes wrong, if we get sick, who will we tell? Will anyone give us medicine? No one will give it to us.
As the haze deepens, Lahore's skyline fades behind a curtain of smoke and dust, a familiar winter scene in Punjab province, where vehicle emissions, crop burning, and construction dust trap millions in a cycle of polluted air and poor health.
Over to Iraq now, and Iraqis began casting ballots on Tuesday in parliamentary elections to choose a new 329-member legislature. More than 7,700 candidates are competing in the election, which will decide whether Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani secures a second term. This marks Iraq's 6th parliamentary vote since the 2003 US-led invasion. Let's now take a short break. When we return, there'll be more news and updates. Take care. Welcome back to A News. You're watching Daybreak. Now, in an historic first at the White House, Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara met with President Trump in a closed-door session on Monday. This landmark visit, the first ever by a Syrian leader, focused on key issues including counter-terror, cooperation and Syria's urgent request for the repeal of US sanctions. Obey Shambanda brings us more.
It was the first ever visit by a Syrian president to the White House on Monday, where President Trump met with Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Shara. It was a meeting that was closed to the press, but according to reports, the two leaders discussed a number of topics, including counter-terror cooperation. Washington reportedly wants Syria to join the anti-ISIS coalition. Reports also suggest that President Trump and Ahmed al-Shara discussed the need for the protection of religious and ethnic minorities in Syria. The Syrians are keen in getting all sanctions, including the Congressional Caesar Act sanctions, repealed. That is something that President Trump has supported, but Congress has yet to fully act and fully unconditionally appeal those sanctions. We do know that there has been a number of discussions behind closed doors between the Trump administration and Damascus, including talks with U.S. Central Command on continuing the efforts to battle the remnants of the ISIS terror group in Syria. There was no joint press conference or joint press statement following a meeting, that meeting between President Trump and Ahmed al-Shara, which lasted a little over an hour. But there are also reports suggesting that Turkey's foreign minister, Hakan Fidan, who is also here in Washington, could participate in trilateral talks with Syria's foreign minister and Trump White House officials. So a historic meeting in the White House, the first ever instance in which a Syrian leader met with the American president, an indication that the Trump administration is supporting a new government in Damascus that took power a little over a year ago, where officials in Damascus want to establish new ties with the West and with the United States. The United States military still maintains a presence in the eastern part of Syria. President Trump's special envoy to Syria, Thomas Barak, is a close confidant of the president. He was also present in that meeting in the Oval Office with Ahmed al-Shara. So a number of important meetings here in the White House that suggest that the Trump administration wants to give Syria a new chance, as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent called it, where we've also seen the Trump administration remove the special designation of Ahmed al-Shara and his Minister of Defense, their removal from the terror sponsor list, which also suggests that Washington is seeking cooperation with the new Syrian administration to ensure that ISIS is no longer able to establish a foothold on Syrian territory. 10 years ago, ISIS controlled nearly 30% of Syria and was able to launch international terror attacks from their home base in Syria. Now, with the regime of Bashar al-Assad collapsed, and with Ahmed al-Shara and his new government in Damascus trying to establish economic ties and help bring about the reconstruction and renewal of Syria following decades of war and destruction, a meeting here in Washington that could perhaps open up a new chapter for the new Syria. I'm Ubi Shibander, A News, Washington.
And then moving from the US to Europe, Anita Sharma brings us some of the top developments on the major ongoing stories. Here they are.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where key delegates gather at the COP30 Global Climate Summit in Belém, Brazil, but the world's biggest emitters are largely absent. Although China and India did not send top-tier leadership, the U.S. completely snubbed the summit, leaving the EU to carry much of the burden alone. With global momentum slowing to fight climate change, the EU is trying to figure out how to stay committed and keep its promises as developing countries demand close to €1 trillion annually in climate finance. The EU contributed about €43 billion last year. The bloc faces steep hurdles domestically as well, amid a renewed focus on amping up defense capabilities. According to data from the EU's Joint Research Center, China, the US, and India account for nearly half the world's emissions at 29, 11, and 8% respectively. The EU 27 stands at around 6%, but when consumption-based or indirect emissions are factored in, that figure jumps to 9% of global emissions. To Paris, where former French President Nicolas Sarkozy is out of jail and back home pending appeal after a criminal conspiracy conviction tied to alleged Libyan campaign funding. A court ruled he was no longer a flight risk, so he was freed under strict judicial supervision. Sarkozy, who was president of France from 2007 until 2012, said to the court, quote, "It's tough, really tough, as it must be for any detainee." He added that he never imagined experiencing prison at the age of 70. During a 50-minute hearing, the former president again denied all wrongdoing. Sarkozy was not even 3 weeks into a 5-year sentence at the notorious La Santé prison. Finally, in the UK, the BBC faces a leadership crisis after the Director General and the CEO of News both resigned. This after revelations that a documentary misedited a speech by U.S. President Trump, which apparently made it look as though Trump urged supporters to, quote, fight like hell at the Capitol Hill riots back in January 2021. According to a letter dated November 9th, Trump's lawyers threatened legal action demanding a retraction and compensation of up to $1 billion U.S. They're also looking for an apology for, quote, false, defamatory, disparaging, misleading, and inflammatory statements about the president. BBC Chairman Samir Shah apologized for the, quote, error of judgment and accepted that the edit gave the impression of, quote, a direct call for violent action. However, Shah also emphasized it was not true that the BBC did nothing to address the problems raised. Shah maintains there is no systemic bias at the BBC. These are the stories we are watching closely for you from Europe. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now, finally, we go to the Chinese runner Yu Shengni has broken the 100-mile record at the Antarctic Ice Ultra Marathon. It's one of the world's toughest endurance races, battling temperatures as low as -35 Celsius. He completed the grueling 160.9-kilometer run in just over 22 hours.
Under the blinding white skies of Antarctica, China's Yu Shengni shattered the 100-mile record at the 2025 Antarctic Ice Ultra, finishing in 22 hours, 40 minutes and 47 seconds. The endurance feat beat last year's record of 23 hours, 22 minutes, 57 seconds by Paul Johnson and Rob Sembiante. Under deceptively bright skies and temperatures ranging from -15 degrees Celsius to -30 degrees Celsius, runners faced harsh conditions during the Antarctic Ice Ultra at Ultima Base. Unlike standard marathons of 42.2 kilometres, ultramarathons like this one extend much farther, often covering 50 kilometres, 80.5 kilometres, 100 kilometres or more. Despite the sunshine, frostbite remained a constant threat, forcing athletes to layer up and apply sunscreen against the snow. Ni, a veteran of more than 500 marathons and ultramarathons, maintained a calm rhythm throughout the brutal course, relying on sparse aid stations for heat, food and hydration. His victory stands as a new benchmark in one of the planet's harshest endurance challenges.
Wow, what a feat that is. Well done to him. Goodness. Well, thank you for watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani.
And me, Lou Brown. You're up to date with the world news for this morning. From all of us in the studio, thank you and see you tomorrow.